Hi guys, welcome to another video. So with Battlefield 5 releasing this week, I decided to think and collate my impressions of the game, but also think about where we are in terms of your comments on my videos throughout the alpha and the beta. Now just to be clear here, I'm discussing today impressions by you guys around the game post-beta, and also my opinions around it post-beta. I want to cut through the rhetoric a little bit and give you some thoughts on where I think that the game is going to end up. Now, I've been reading through your discussions around the game on my channel. I went through a lot of the videos and scrolled down, read all the comments, and how that gives us some clues as to how this game is going to go down, obviously including my impressions as well. I want to think about if it's going to retain any longevity through the next year's cycle, and it's sad that there is a cycle that fast now at all after so many of us years ago said that that would never happen. But it is what it is. Now, for those who don't know, I was at a Battlefield event in Stockholm this weekend where we were able to play the core gameplay, and this was great and an insightful opportunity that I'll be talking about in much more detail later this week. For today, I want to think about where we are, as I say, based on your comments and your impressions thus far, and this of course has to assume that any comments people have made are sincere and not just, say, hating on the game or fanboying on the game. So looking back through your comments, what I've seen, and one of the most significant things that I've seen, is the amount of people saying that as a veteran I played the beta, and whilst it's far from perfect, this is the more hopeful I have been about a Battlefield game in many years. That to me is significant because, as you guys will know yourselves, a lot of my audience have always been Battlefield veterans for obvious reasons, one being that I've been covering Battlefield on the channel for nearly a decade. The reasons these kind of comments are noteworthy as well for me is the fact that I haven't seen anybody on my channel over the past, say, 3 to 4 years saying anything like this, and if anything it's been the opposite. Whenever I've talked about Battlefield, people have been saying, "Lutin, why do you play BF at all now? Me as a veteran and my guys, we stopped playing a long time ago." I saw that repeatedly over the past few years. Well, now through the beta, I've seen the tone of these comments change, and people, and this is, people that I recognize on the channel, people are actually appearing hopeful. So when you cut through the rhetoric and read between the lines, these kind of comments are actually, to me, really significant. Because more and more these days, it's hard to cut through just the kind of tone of conversation and get down to reading perhaps, what is behind that, seeing what is behind there, reading behind the lines, judging kind of maybe the sort of invisible buyers, the people that are kind of not commenting very often, but when they do comment, you kind of have to take note. That's a really difficult thing to do because, of course, you can't know a person's intentions or background. So I kind of have to just look at the overall tone of the way that people are talking and try to gauge some kind of reading of that situation and the way people are coming across. And that comes from me just, as I say, I find it a positive as a YouTube producer to actually look through my comments, read my comments, and then that way, from video to video, I can gain more insight based on what you guys are saying, which is why I always encourage you to comment on the video, because it actually helps me read and understand and, like I say, gain some insight for myself there. For me, as you know, Hardline was a mess. Go look at my review of that. Battlefield 1 also was just all over the place for me. It's why I largely skipped it as a game, and I offered very little in terms of content. It didn't give me much of what I wanted. Many of its features and mechanics were just not engaging. As I've said, I already feel that this is different with Battlefield 5. I think the inclusion of the attrition system, which DICE have already said that they're going to tweak based on beta feedback, they said that basically straight after the beta, is part of the game. And I like it because it makes people consider their actions more. And yes, in some situations it slows gameplay down, but I also think that that isn't a bad thing at all either. The game isn't without problems. As we saw in the beta, the progression UI structure is convoluted, as has been widely pointed out, and some people are unhappy with the way in which weapon unlocks go as well, in that you have to purchase additional weapons with in-game currency of the same type, and then you upgrade those weapons differently instead of just, say, using one weapon and loading it out as per Battlefield 4. I still think that doing it in the way that we've done in the past in BF4 in terms of loadout is preferable than the annoying BF1 system, BF1 having multiple weapons that just had minor changes and you have to choose between them, or in this BF5 system as well. I think it would just be better to go the loadout, but it's the way they've gone. It is how it is. It's not a game-breaking situation for me. When it comes to technical issues or even, say, UI stuff, as I've said in my real problem video, people are fast to point at games like Battlefield 4 and say, look, this is the gold standard, make it like that. Well, in truth, no recent Battlefield game from BF3 onwards has been without continual ongoing tinkering post-launch. People are always really quick to forget. Most games are often pretty messy and complained about by the community at launch. Battlefield 5 is not going to be any different. The devs will do their best, but let's not bullshit around. People will complain a ton at launch. That is just going to 100% happen. One common thing I've noted people saying in comments as well is that this game looks and feels better than BF1, but that it isn't as good as previous titles, e.g. BF4 before that. But the specific reasons people then list beyond that split apart very, very quickly. There doesn't seem to be some overall consensus. There seems to be a litany of small issues which people personally dislike. So some are going to be things like revive mechanics. Some don't like that the slower revives because it makes people more vulnerable, makes people less likely to then want to go for a revive at all. Anybody who plays a specific role is going to be almost always unhappy when anything changes because they feel that they are now less viable or that they have to relearn a system of play. Tankers, for example, still feeling that they can be taken down too quickly, shock. Snipers, for example, disliking sweet spot changes or the ability for infantry to heal themselves back up again so they can't get those important follow-up shots in on a kill. Also things like the change in focus towards more squad and team-based play in terms of how people support one another and how lone players may struggle to a degree to do perhaps as well as they had done previously. That's a continual bone of contention and something people have talked about a lot, but you know, again, it is what it is. I've seen you guys saying things as well like it's unfair to expect that people will squad up, or that regular friends are, say, unreliable so they have to play alone, and that they don't want to join a clan or platoon either, they just want to be able to get in and play. But there are equally those who say the game should provide an experience that caters for the squad-focused player and the casual player alike. But that one seems an odd suggestion to me because those two things seem pretty incompatible. You know, you can't just give everybody everything they want all the time. I think, as I've said many times before, casual player, whatever casual actually means, because usually whenever people leave these kind of comments, they never actually explain or expand upon what they consider to be casual. So I'm just going to assume it means people who just want to jump in a game, get some kills, play by their own rules, and then leave whenever they get bored. As I've said, these people can slot into a more focused teamwork situation, because by being casual, they should be able to just slot in anywhere, just join a game, start playing. They don't care too much one way or the other. But teamwork orientated players can't slot into a server so easily. They can't slot into a server full of, say, casual headless chickens. It works one way and not the other. So I can't say that team-based games should primarily or equally cater to casual players. That to me just makes no sense at all. We're all busy, of course, in our lives, but a game requiring the most basic, and I mean the most very, very ABC alphabet bricks basics of working with other players, to me, isn't something that excludes others, because it should almost be natural and common sense already. I mean, you're joining into a game that is about two teams fighting it out by cooperation. And if that isn't the experience you want, there's plenty of battle royale games out there. There are of course as well the ongoing issues around the style and aesthetic choices of the game. First, people decried the inclusion of female characters as being historically inaccurate, not immersive enough, or some saying I wanted just a more historically accurate, immersive game in general overall. And then people jumping in to say, no, actually it's not about the gender itself, it's about the forcing of social agendas because it's a game coming out of Sweden and we don't want that in our game. Now, the list of these things goes on and on, it gets worse as well, but it's interesting how these kind of issues stick to some games and not to others. I always find it interesting how most of these heated conversations occur only pre-release and then they very quickly dissolve post-release. You could infer from this that those making the case were never that interested in it in the first place but enjoyed the outrage fest, or you could infer that they were hopeful to get some part of it changed pre-release, hence the pressure pre-release, but then once it was released they just realised that it's a lost cause and abandoned that quest. Either way, in terms of what actual impact this will have, is very, very difficult to say. People are always going to point to, say, pre-sales and say, oh look, you see, case in point, example right there. It's a more grey situation than that. Like most of these things, it will likely burn out a week or two post-release, as I say, for whatever reason, and the game is then going to be left with those who are interested in the game itself and not the constructed socio-political discussions around it, as it's almost universally always the case. Returning to the actual gameplay though, now I've seen plenty of comments as well from people saying that they just felt the game was boring, uninteresting, the gameplay didn't give them just the right vibe or the right feel. And I'd say to those people that this isn't anything specific to this game. I've felt this myself many times before. Battlefield 1, for example, felt like that for me. So did COD World at War. I felt in COD World at War, the guns kind of just felt like cardboard. And that's a game that was very much loved by many people, but it wasn't one for me. I did play it, I played it with people, but it just never felt right to me. And that's because, shockingly I know, most games are subjectively interpreted by yourself. What might be right for you, might not be right for some. It took me quite a lot of effort not to sing that, by the way. So this cuts to the real core of where we are with Battlefield 5, brings me to the conclusions that I have for this release based on the beta. So for me, Battlefield 5 will have undoubtedly a difficult launch, perhaps the most difficult of recent memory, for several obvious reasons. One, the damage done in the minds of consumers by the nonsense of Star Wars Battlefront loot boxes. I feel that's contributed to lack of pre-sales significantly. Two, being the obvious rhetoric around historical accuracy and or pushed agendas coming into the game. Three, being that existing players are nearly always initially unhappy when the next game comes along and changes the way a game that they felt very comfortable with suddenly is, alien to them. Four, being that the game is leaning, although not very heavily in my opinion, toward team play again, both in pacing and mechanics. And this is jarring for some people who've been able to play and survive lone wolfing for a long time, as the game had leaned that way, but now it's going the other way, suddenly they're out of their comfort zone. Battlefield 5 is just simply a very different game than past iterations we've had in the past few years. This for me is not at all a bad thing, and most of the people I know personally who are veteran players and also who I know have skipped over the past 3 or so years of Battlefield are now telling me that they are up for this game and actually feel excited for it, which is a surprising and noteworthy thing. But you can't please all people all of the time, you simply can't. DICE as a developer have to choose the game that they want to make, and then people will either be on board or they won't. It's as simple as that. While BF1 sold plenty of copies and had a decent player base through its lifespan, one issue I've spoken to and also heard from many people, some devs included, was the issue of player retention. That although it had a core base, it struggled to attract new players and keep them because they often found it frustrating to play or just disliked the way that it played, the feel, the atmosphere, maybe the pacing, maybe the fact that it was so chaotic, the chaotic nature of Battlefield, remember that one? So I think with Battlefield 5, the devs are banking on going in a different direction, hence the attrition system. They want to say, okay, we can see there's an issue with the Battlefield series, with the fragmented and casual way that people play, the chaotic nature of the way that people play, and they want to try and remedy that. Will this mean that the game is a success, or will it even be able to solve this issue of bringing people back together again? I feel like in my core, that is just not possible, or not possible in any kind of short term. It seems like a very uphill struggle to truly get people in 2018 working together again. There isn't a quick fix. However, saying that, there is one thing that I feel is a significant positive, and that is the veteran players. Now, veteran players do not just have to mean high-skill players rinsing scrubs round after round. Veteran players are often more likely to help and support because most veteran players come from a different time in FPS where it wasn't so glory hunting play of the game based. Now, I know there's going to be those of you who always say, LT, you're wrong, it was just the same back then. What about arena shooters? What about Battlefield 2? People still craved the top score kills back then. Yeah, of course they did. And I'm not suggesting that it's not the case either. I always remember something one of my top PvP WoW friends said to me when we were grinding for High Warlord back in the day as a team. And he said the only thing that people remember is the name of that guy on the top of the board. You see that guy at the top of the board and you remember him. And he was right, and he'd be right now as well. Except that as true as that isn't what team-based games were all about, and that was also as true then as it is now. You had players back then who craved those top spots in games like Battlefield 2, but the difference is that a lot more players back then overall, collectively, were more invested in working together and working for the win than you do now. Now that's the main core difference. I feel that Battlefield 5 is going to be a game that brings veteran players back in and creates hopefully a stronger level of consistency in the game. You're still going to get steamroll rounds, you're still going to get rounds where players can't even break that first line in, say, a round of Grand Operation or, say, back in the day, Conquest Assault. These things will exist and always probably exist, but it's about looking at an overall shift, even a subtle one, and saying, okay, you know, this feels like it's going in a different direction. It would be extremely naive and more than a little ignorant to think that you're going to just snap your fingers with a few mechanical changes and the whole player base is going to fall in line and suddenly be super team and squad orientated. Battlefield 5 isn't going to do that, and I don't think it's trying to do that either. But what it is trying to do is create mechanics that enable, say, veteran players to engage more with the game than they've been able to for years, and for newer players who've never experienced that level of cooperation to get a taste of it and maybe think, you know what, this works for me, and I want to get myself some more of that. It reminds me very much of when I used to host private games, and I'd get people coming to me after the games and saying, this was amazing, I never had any games that played like this before, I love this is what I want to play like now. So again, it's just naive and maybe cynical to assume that there are not people out there who are just waiting to see this kind of experience and go, oh my god, this is 100 times better than how I've been playing, I just never knew that I could get this from the game. Now, making these changes, maybe you're going to lose some people along the way, but that's the way of things whenever something changes. It's why Battlefield 1 lost me as a player, because I just hated how the dynamic of the game changed with its flow, its weapon mechanics, the way all that stuff worked. It was fine, it was a game, I could play it, I could still have some good rounds in it, it was a shooter, but it just didn't feel like it mattered if people worked together one way or the other. Battlefield 1 was fine, it was a game, it was a shooter, I could play, I could still have some good rounds in, but it didn't feel like it mattered. It didn't feel like it mattered if people worked together one way or the other. Whereas Battlefield 5 for me, when I've played in the beta, it does feel like that. It does feel like that from the experiences we had. It feels like it actually does matter if you're working together, both as a squad and obviously wider than that. Take, for example, in Battlefield 5, squad leaders have a lot of power. They can bring in features that in past games only a commander would have been able to call to the battlefield. And if you want to get the best out of the game, you're going to have to find some people and squad up. And while many people want to decry that, I think actually once people get their head in the game, they're going to go for it. And moreover, create a slow burning, more solid player base for the game than we've seen in years. It's not going to happen overnight either, it's certainly not going to happen on day one, and I would say it's going to be hard to really gauge how the game is sitting with people until after the new year, maybe even into the spring of 2019. It's going to be a good while before we really see how things are with this, and of course there's going to be changes and patches and updates as well to adjust things along the way. People have gotten used to playing a certain way for so long, and that certainly isn't helped by now the releases and inclusion of so many Battle Royale games coming out, because they are invariably by their nature highly self-orientated. It's all about the sole glory there. Of course you have some squad play, but you know what I mean. This is why I feel the inclusion of a BR mode in Battlefield 5 is a fundamentally bad choice that could have a negative impact on all the positive changes that I just talked about, and it will just remain to be seen what impact that has. Of course, you know, some streamers are really excited about the idea of Battle Royale in Battlefield, and I can understand that, but in terms of the core gameplay, like I say, it really threatens to undermine everything there. As I've said many times, it's still the case in Battlefield that you can see the top 10 players in a team of 32 carrying anything like 70% of the team's score, which is pretty insane, and it says a lot more about the community than any gameplay will. The final thing that I'll say today is that my hopes for this game are alive. Maybe not high, because I'm not ready to be that committed to things just yet, because also, as I've regularly said, you guys know, the community, not the mechanics of the game itself, basically make the game what it is. If you've got a shitty community, you've got a shitty game. So if people continue to play like headless chickens in Battlefield, then no amount of smart mechanics will change that it feels like a bunch of people playing like headless chickens. But there is an amount of hope that things like attrition will make people start to realise, hey, I need to work with others, and it's entirely possible that wanting that to happen is a bit of a lost cause at this point in time. Yeah, as I say, it's my hope that maybe people won't realise this maybe initially, but that if we see, say, veteran players returning to the game through example, and maybe even through communication, people will start to see the light, and then we'll be moving in the right direction. Battlefield 5 is a big shift, and undoubtedly plenty of people are going to dislike it because, you know, it's not as easy as, say, the running and gunning that you've seen in Battlefield 1 that's prolific, the almost unending chain of action of just like run, shoot, run, shoot, run, shoot, run, shoot. You're still going to have that to a degree, but it's definitely, you know, just leaning away. And hearing the marketing taglines we've heard for years of stuff like fastest Battlefield, the chaotic nature of Battlefield that we all know, hearing that stuff ringing in your ears, it's worrying, right? But from the beta, as I already said, this is not how Battlefield 5 feels, no matter what marketing say. You actually have more of a classic Battlefield feel where you can pause and you can think and you can find a position or a line to hold. I feel like really in Battlefield 5 the main thing it has often is breathing space. You know, there's a little bit of time there to think about what you want to do, and it isn't just a kind of tidal wave of just rambling shooting all over the place. But look, overall, holistically, this game's going to be a rough ride, but I think if it can weather the storms of the first few months, it has the potential to be the most solid Battlefield game we've seen for years. There's no quick fix to how the community of Battlefield has devolved over time, but this game is hopefully the first step in leading people back to where it needs to be, and that in combination with also a hope that veterans will come back and become a solid core for the game as well, is for me a really positive and constructive choice. As always guys, thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed. If you did, drop a like, tell me what you think down below, and I'll be back with some more Battlefield this week and going into next week. I'll also be streaming as well, so if you want to drop a follow there, it's twitch.tv/Lutin as always. See you in the next one.